What's going on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt here with Mike Kaye for the latest episode of the No Huddle Show, our preview episode for Sunday's game against the Chicago Bears at Soldier Field. I'm excited to get out to Chicago. It'll be my first time there. But this is a big game. There's some news to cover before we get into it. The All-Pro teams came out today. Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox are the only ones to make it. Looks like Zach Ertz narrowly missed. He had like 10 votes or something. He was a snub. I think he qualifies as a snub. He broke the record for receptions. Lane Johnson didn't make it. Brandon Brooks, and you can make a case that Malcolm Jenkins should have been on it. The biggest snub I think is Ertz. But I mean, what was your initial takeaway when you saw the selections?
Well, I think Ertz. I can understand why Ertz didn't make it, just because he's not really a
beat him. Yeah.
Yeah, he's not really a multiverse tight end. He's gotten better as a blocker. He's not that good. George Kittle and Travis Kelce both had really good seasons. They
both broke the receiving yards record. But I still thought Ertz had better numbers than Kittle, and he was more important, I think, to the Eagles than like maybe those guys are to their offenses. But
I would agree with that. I just think for what they did, I think yardage always outweighs receptions, plus they're both pretty decent blockers.
All three of them are all-pro talents is the reality.
Right, there's only a limited amount of guys that get in. I was really shocked that Brandon Brooks didn't get in. That was like my biggest beef with the list. He's only allowed one sack in 2 seasons, and the sack came on the last week of the season. I think he's been the best right guard in football for the last 2 years. So that was a little surprising. Lane Johnson, I understand the frustration.
Started off slow for him, but he over the last 10 weeks he's been elite.
I think part of it is a lack of perspective of what he was going through and the injuries. And then Malcolm Jenkins, I think he had a better year than Harrison Smith, period. And
I think there are other safeties that did too. So not necessarily like Malcolm, because if you look purely at numbers, Malcolm doesn't necessarily put up the numbers that like you look for normally in an all-pro guy. But as we've raved about him on this show, he's an all-pro player. I mean, Johnson won also a thing you have to consider. It's split up left tackle, right tackle, and the guys ahead of him are like Mitchell Schwartz and Ryan Ramczyk, I think is how you say his name, from the Saints. Like those
guys are both very good.
Like Mitchell Schwartz especially deserved it this year.
Right.
So it's hard to get in. There's only 2 slots. I don't know if there's a way to like fix the voting and just where you have the best 11 guys on both sides or something. I don't know, but there are guys every year, and people act like, why does this matter? But it matters when it comes like down the line, and these are guys that are like on the edge of the Hall of Fame or something. Like this is part of their resume. That's why like the Pro Bowl stuff matters, and that's why the All-Pro stuff matters. If it's a guy like Jason Kelce, who he has 2 All-Pros, which kind of makes up for the fact that he didn't make the Pro Bowl the last 2 years, but it's still ridiculous that he didn't.
Well, also it ties into financial benefits because a lot of contracts have the stipulation that if you make an All-Pro, you get a nice bonus. I think for these guys, winning a Super Bowl obviously means way more. Having a long playoff run means more. And again, I mean, I think there are issues with the Pro Bowl ballot. I think there are issues with the AP ballot. Both of them kind of do things that other people complain about the other for having. You brought up having a right tackle designated. Well, that's not something that the Pro Bowl does. They have 3 left tackles in there this year. They typically do. You look at the pass rusher thing.
Yeah.
Pro Bowl, it's hard for a 4-3 linebacker to make the Pro Bowl because these pass rushers
are getting 15 sacks.
Right.
Yeah.
So Darius Leonard making it. There was a lot of rookies that made it.
That was pretty cool that the rookies made it.
You look at the Colts and how well they've played. Darius Leonard and Quentin Nelson, both
2 rookies on the first team All-Pro. Like that's wild.
I mean,
they were really good, but
so I think it shows you where the league's going, and I think the league is going in a really cool direction where you're seeing a lot of young guys step up a lot earlier than previous, draft classes. And this draft class was special.
Rookie class is really good.
Right.
You look at the impact guys around the league. I mean, you have Derwin James and all those quarterbacks that are killing it right now. Like Bradley Chubb had double-digit sacks. Like there's probably rookie classes that are comparable, but this is one of the better ones I can remember.
Yeah, I mean, this is up there for sure. And I think, the NFL is getting an influx of talent that it really needs, because for a couple of years it just seemed like 3 teams ruled, the roost, like pretty much. Like this was all about the Patriots, the Steelers, and and Green Bay and some of those guys. Now it seems like there's a little bit more parity because of how well some of these young rookies are coming in, like Baker Mayfield, and having very good rookie seasons.
Lamar Jackson with the Ravens. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I think that's very interesting. It's a shame that Jenkins and Brooks and Johnson in particular got snubbed, but it says a lot that Kelsey was voted in. He battled the knee injury throughout most of the season. A lot of people didn't know how bad the knee injury was, and he's had a really good season. And Fletcher Cox, in a career year, makes his first team All-Pro. I think that's pretty special.
Yeah, we won't dwell on that too much. That's about the past in reality because it's about the season. We're here to talk about the playoff game, Eagles versus Bears. I've gone back and forth about how I feel about this game, but I think the Eagles can go into it feeling good. It's like we've said, it's going to be a really tough road matchup. The conditions aren't going to be as bad as like you would expect in Chicago. In January, it'll be 40. It'll probably be windy because that's Chicago. I think that's why they call it the Windy City, maybe. I don't know. But it'll be a road game. I mean, they're going against a team that doesn't have that much playoff experience. Matt Nagy, first year. Like, there's a lot of the points we've talked about. But I don't know. You get the vibe around the Eagles that they're pretty confident in their ability to go into Chicago and win.
Yeah, I share that confidence. I think this is a team that is playing its best football. They have a reason to be a little cocky. They just shut out their division rival, no matter who was playing quarterback for them. And I think the Eagles overall have just kind of gravitated towards this underdog mentality again because quite frankly, they have to. They played their best when their backs are against the wall. This is going to be a much harder task than last year's playoff run. And you're playing a rookie quarterback with an inconsistent kicker. And you've got a great red zone defense. That could really kind of change things. The Bears defense is very good, but when you look at how the Eagles have been able to shut some teams down in the red zone, I think the Eagles have a decent advantage in that aspect because Cody Parkey, former Eagles kicker, has been so inconsistent for the Bears. And, Chicago's not a great place to kick either. So if this game comes down to a bunch of field goals, I think the Eagles have to feel a lot better about Jake Elliott than the Bears do about Cody Parkey. I also think if the Eagles can make some big splash plays here and there, that can lead to big points. I don't expect this game to be very high scoring. And I think that plays into what the Eagles do. I don't think the Eagles are a team that is going to, absent the Washington game, blow teams out. I think it's going to be a struggle, and I think this defense is up for that challenge.
We both wrote similar stories this week where we went through each position and compared how the Eagles stacked up with the Bears. I kind of want to do that right now. Let's start at the top. Let's start at quarterback. It's Mitchell Trubisky versus Nick Foles. Trubisky put up pretty good numbers this year. He definitely improved from last year. A lot of that has to do with Matt Nagy being in the Doug Peterson school of putting the quarterback in the best position to succeed. I'm not entirely sold on him as like a franchise guy, but he's gotten the job done, though he did struggle a little bit at the end of the year. That's a whole build-up to say. I think it's pretty clear that Nick Foles, at this point, like just based on what we've seen the last few weeks, he has the edge there.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Nick has experience in clutch situations. I think he's a guy that is pretty dynamic when it comes to getting the ball out quickly, evading the rush, and he's a guy that's really, really smart. I think he showed that the last few weeks. The audible on the 48-yard pass to Nelson Aguilar, he has a really good feel for the game, a real understanding of the game. And he's playing well without the RPOs. They've been able to expand his game, and I think he's a guy I would trust in a clutch situation as opposed to a rookie in Trubisky who has improved quite tremendously but is still relatively inconsistent.
I think we find out what kind of quarterback Mitchell Trubisky is this weekend. I feel that him and like Jared Goff has had a little more success than him probably, but he struggled a lot at the end of the year, and those are two guys in this playoffs. You're kind of going to find out if these are guys that a team can build around or if they're just like the type that maybe they don't lose you any playoff games or something, because I'm more lean towards that with those guys.
Yeah, I wasn't a big Trubisky guy coming out of the draft. I kind of looked at him as the Midwest Blake Bortles. It was a joke that a few of us had.
His big thing was his athleticism.
Right, and he's running very, very well. He's getting out in space and picking up yardage, and Nagy has basically allowed him to do that, which I think is great, similar to how Doug Peterson treats Carson Wentz. The issue with him is I feel like he takes a lot of risks at times and they don't pay off, that can stall drives. And so I think if you've got a lot of pressure in his face, Michael Bennett, Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, I mean, the three of them have been forcing unreal pressure over the last month. And so given the weight of this game, I mean, it's going to be all on him.
Yeah, I think as long as Nick Foles just does his job, at least, even if he's not like Superman Nick Foles, it'll come down to whether they force some turnovers on Trubisky, if they can contain him and be able to focus their attention more on the running backs, which we can lead into right now. I think this is another one that's probably more obvious than the quarterback position, that the Bears have the advantage here. I mean, Jordan Howard is a really good running back. He's a strong, powerful runner, and the combination of him and Tarik Cohen is like, that's what you look for in like a thunder and lightning type running back duo. We've talked a lot about how the Eagles need running backs. Like, they need to build a running backfield that's like guys with different skill sets. And these two guys they complement each other so perfectly, and it's really hard to defend them, especially Tarik, who can line up all over the field. He's a great returner as well. He's a really good receiver. He's small, but he's like the biggest concern I would have in terms of the Bears offense going into this game.
Yeah, outside of Khalil Mack, Tarik Cohen's been the name that you've heard most in Philadelphia. He is a concern. He does have some Brian Westbrook to him, some Darren Sproles to him. He can get out in space and make big plays. I think, as you mentioned with Jordan Howard, what Jordan Howard has done to expand on his game as a receiver with Nagy in town has been really, really great for them, because you're not keying in on just him running the football.
Like with Josh Adams, like you've talked about. Yeah.
Correct. And I think the way Nagy uses both, it's a okay, cool. So you have really good safeties who can go and run after the ball. Cool. So we're going to avoid the running game and we're going to pass it. If you guys have the box set up where we're going to have some running lanes out on the outside, we'll go outside. I mean, they can attack you in any way possible because of how well these two complement each other.
They can play together, too, just based on their skill sets. And funny thing is, I tweeted yesterday that Donnell Pumphrey is pretending to be Tarik Cohen in practice, and the universal reaction was, why can't he just be Tarik Cohen? Like, it's kind of like there's some irony in there somewhere about how the Eagles traded up in the fourth round to get Donnell Pumphrey, when if they traded up a little bit higher, they could have got someone like Tarik Cohen. Or the year before that, Jordan Howard was picked, I think, a few picks before Wendell Smallwood. Like, those are two drafts where the Eagles could have their running back right now, and they failed. I mean, we've criticized them for that plenty, but the fact that Donnell Pumphrey's a practice squad running back who was passed over for Boston Scott, who is pretending to be a player that was picked not long before him, is kind of a sad state of affairs. You almost feel bad for the kid. He's a good kid. I like Donnell as a guy. He just didn't work out. Wide receivers. This one's a little more close. I know you're pretty high on the Bears group. I'm more high on their potential than what they are right now necessarily. They have Allen Robinson. He's a solid veteran. He's coming off injury from last year. He had a pretty good year, around the same numbers as Alshon Jeffrey, actually. Taylor Gabriel, really good deep threat. Probably better than any deep threat the Eagles have. I'm really high on Anthony Miller's potential going forward. I think he might be injured. I'm not sure what his status is for Sunday, but he's a really talented guy. I just think the Eagles receivers at their best are better than the Bears receivers at their best, and that Alshon Jeffrey right now is playing at his best.
To me, it's a push. I mean, I think Allen Robinson is a really dynamic talent in a way that I think Alshon Jeffrey and Allen Robinson cancel each other out. Where I kind of lean towards the Bears is Anthony Miller was my favorite wide receiver in the draft. It wasn't even close.
Where'd he go, Memphis?
Yes, and he could catch literally everything. I look at the wide receiver room for the Eagles as Alshon Jeffrey, Nelson Aguilar, huge drop-off, Golden Tate, Jordan Matthews, Mike Wallace. With the Bears, I see Allen Robinson way up top. Then you've got Anthony Miller. And Taylor Gabriel is a guy that I really thought the Jaguars should have targeted in this offseason when I was covering them.
The Eagles could have used a guy like that this year.
Correct. He is a guy that's developed so much since he first got in the league with Cleveland, went to Atlanta, developed his route running ability, has become such a consistent player for this team. I think it's a push because I do think Aguilar and Jeffrey are better than Allen Robinson and whoever the two of them you want to put in there. But when you go to the three-man group, that can be very troublesome, especially when you consider how Nagy uses every single weapon he has.
I mean, if the Golden Tate trade had worked out, then the Eagles would probably almost have the clear edge because if he's the player that you traded for, then that looks a little better. There actually was a story that came out today about the trade negotiations with the Lions and how the Lions were dead set on not trading him, and then the Eagles just kept bumping up their offer the morning of the trade deadline, which in retrospect just makes it seem even a little worse somehow, but because they were so desperately trying to trade for Golden Tate. But I mean, we've talked a lot about how that trade was a failure, but.
Yeah, and I want to make this clear. When we're grading the trade, we're grading the trade, not the player. I think
he's a good player.
He's a good player. I think the issue for him is his fit in the offense, the idea of how he was going to fit in the offense, and then what you got out of the entire thing. Because remember, that's play calling, that's roster substitutions, that's a rotation, that's how has he been able to handle things on the fly. Doesn't mean he's not a good player. The trade is just an epic failure as of right now. That said, if he comes out and has 102 yards
then it was worth it.
And a touchdown and they beat the Bears, that is worth it, and then you grade it up to a C. If he comes out against New Orleans and blows the door off the place, then Howie can come in here and say,
Hey, told you
so. Because they did trade for him to get to the playoffs and to make moves in the playoffs, and they were able to get into the playoffs in spite of his addition. But if he can make moves in the playoffs, there you go.
I mean, I think there's only he's played 9 playoff games, and the only guys that have played the same amount or more are Michael Bennett, Haloti Ngata, and I think there might have been one other player that. I mean, there's value there. I mean, this is an organization that has experience after winning the Super Bowl, but I mean, in theory, he's going to be ready for the moment at the very least. Tight end, this isn't going to be a very long conversation. The Bears have a familiar face in Trey Burton, but I think it says a lot about the state of these two position groups that Trey Burton will probably still be the number 3 tight end on the Eagles right now. Dallas Goedert's we're both huge fans of him. Zack snubbed for All-Pro. Trey Burton's fine, probably maybe a little overpaid relative to production, but Eagles edge.
Trey Burton has developed actually into a very good starting tight end. Again, as you said, the numbers probably don't back the pay, but very few players who get a big second contract play up to the standard because teams overpay. That said, Zach Ertz, top 3 tight end, as we kind of mentioned earlier in the show. Dallas Goedert has more than made up for Trey Burton. I think he is way more talented. And so you go from that, and the Bears have Trey Burton. Cool. All right, moving on. Next one.
Offensive line. This one's actually interesting because the Bears' offensive line has been good from start to finish of the year. They've given up, I think they're in the top 10 in the fewest sacks given up. They just got Kyle Long back a couple weeks ago, which is really big for them. The Eagles' offensive line at their best is maybe the best in the NFL. I'm a little concerned about the left side of the line this year, especially this week. We don't know if it's probably going to be Isaac Seumalo as long as he gets through this week of practice at left guard. Jason Peters, we've talked about, he doesn't make it through games a lot of the time, and if he's not making it through this game, that means a big V is starting. But the right side is just so good. Jason Kelsey, Brandon Brooks, Lane Johnson. I think I had it as a push, but that right side has me feeling pretty good going into this game.
Yeah, I would take the Eagles' offensive line by a hair. I did get a lot of people that said, hey, I think it's a push. But when you consider the level that they've played at the last 6 games, I think this offensive line's back to being one of the best offensive lines in football. I was just on a Chicago Bears podcast the other day, and they were saying the thing that stood out to us watching tape was how great this offensive line was. And I look, Jason Kelsey's having an incredible year. Brandon Brooks is playing awesome. Lane Johnson's finally healthy. Jason Peters is healthy when you need him sometimes. And I think he's going to get up for this playoff run because he missed out on the last one. And look, I get the debate with Wisniewski and Seumalo. I said this on Twitter. I think Seumalo is much better for the run. He's also a guy that you have to figure out if he's a long-term piece, so you should put him out there in a pressure situation. And, if he's not playing well, you put in Wisniewski. I mean, it is what it is. You don't have an option if Wisniewski's not playing well because you've already benched Seumalo and you've hurt his feelings or whatever you want to say. That's the thing, is you have the option of putting Wisniewski in there. You don't have the option, really, of putting Seumalo in there if you're starting Wisniewski over him, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That's smart player management and personality management, in my opinion.
I agree. I mean, Sayumalo is more likely to be their starting left guard next season than Stefan Wisniewski is, I would say. I'd actually be minorly surprised if he was even on the team next year. He doesn't seem to be very happy based on the way his role has been shuffled in and out. And he has some value, I think, on the trade market, maybe a fifth-round pick, I don't know, but he's a guy, or sixth or something. He's a guy that can play center guard, so he has a lot of starting experience. And, I mean, the Eagles got a fifth-round pick for, like, Matt Tobin a few years ago, so offensive line are in short supply around the league with experience. Anyway, flipping over, we can't really do straight-up the defensive line, because they run a 3-4. But let's do edge rushers, pass rushers, comparing those. I mean, the Bears have the best of the best in the NFL in Khalil Mack, which I think almost immediately gives them the edge. They have a couple other talented guys, Leonard Floyd. They have another pretty good pass rusher too. But the Eagles. This is one of the few teams that the Eagles maybe don't have the edge in this regard, because Michael Bennett has played at a Pro Bowl level this year. He's 9 sacks. Brandon Graham had 70 pressures. Chris Long has had his most sacks since like 2014. But Khalil Mack is the story of this game for the Eagles offense. If they don't contain him, they're not going to win this game.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think it is as simple as that. And I think, too, this offensive line is healthy enough to deal with him now. You know, you look at what they did with J.J. Watt. You look at what they did with Ryan Kerrigan. You look at what they did with Donald. I mean, they can handle big league pass rushers no matter where they're coming from. And so, even Dante Fowler, for instance. But again, this pass rush that the Bears have is special. I mean, Mack is the guy that serves the drink. I think Floyd's a really good player. And, you know, the Eagles have got a bunch of old guys. But when you go into the inside, I think that's where you find where the Eagles kind of have the dominance.
Yeah, I mean, you have Fletcher Cox, who, as we said earlier this week, is the second best defensive tackle in the NFL. He'd be the best in most other years. Like, if you go back in time and you put him in a season, he'd probably be the best one. Haloti Ngata's played a lot better recently. We're both fans of Trayvon Hester. Timmy Jernigan has helped. You know, he's not the same player maybe. But the Bears have a couple of really good guys. Akeem Hicks is really good. He's going to be going against Brandon Brooks, it sounds like. I think he has 8 sacks this year. He's a pretty good pass rusher. He's talented. They have a couple other guys. I'm blanking on their names. Eddie Goldman's pretty good. And they have another guy who plays like defensive end, in quotes, however you qualify that in the 3-4 defense. Linebackers, Roquan Smith is really, really good. And he's another one of those rookies. We didn't mention him earlier. Danny Trevathan is also really good. Both those guys make plays more than the Eagles linebackers do. Like that, if you just look at the numbers, if you watch them on film, they're better players. But the Eagles linebackers are good within the system, so it's not like they don't have value. But I think the Bears have the edge there.
Yeah, it's not close. Moving on.
Cornerbacks. We're both high in the way the cornerbacks have been playing recently for the Eagles, but Kyle Fuller has been unreal this season. I think he made an All-Pro team. I'm pretty sure. I didn't.
Well, he had seven
interceptions, like 22 pass deflections.
Yeah, he had a great year.
Their other Prince Amukamara's had a good year. Bryce Callahan's been pretty good. They clearly have the edge, though. You can be optimistic about the future of the Eagles secondary, I think, with the way Crayvon LeBlanc has played, where Rasul Douglas has played the best games of his career recently. Avonte Maddox, we've talked about plenty on this podcast, and then you have Jalen Mills coming back. But the Bears cornerbacks might be the best group of corners in the NFL.
Yeah, and that lends itself to the safety play because they have the best safety duo in the league, in my opinion. They have Adrian Amos and Eddie Jackson. Eddie Jackson's dealing with an injury. He practiced on Thursday, so if he's able to play, he's missed a couple of weeks. That would be a big deal. He's produced 6 interceptions this season. He's a guy that can attack the ball in the air, and I think Nick Foles is going to have to really pick his spots when he launches balls downfield. This is a really special secondary right now, and I think the pass rush gets a lot of credit, but this secondary is very, very, very good.
So do you have? I forget. Did you have the Bears safety?
I do.
Well, because Corey Graham is.
Well, yeah, Corey Graham, and also you look at the depth that they have. Dion Bush is a really good backup safety as well. Houston Carson, I believe is his last name. He's had a pretty good season as well as a special teams player. I just think when you look at the depth, that's where it kind of lies. And then obviously free safety, Corey Graham being compared to Eddie Jackson is, that's like comparing, Big Chew to, whatever you want to call it. I mean, whatever the best gum is, I guess. But yeah, again, I think this is a very good secondary, and it's going to be challenging to make big plays against them.
Kicker, punter, returners. We can go through this real quick. Jake Elliott's better than Cody Parkey.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody in Philadelphia knows that. Cameron Johnson's better than Pat O'Donnell.
Yeah, and Rick Lovato has a better smile than,
I don't even know
than the other guy is. But
insert long snapper name.
So what I'll say is, like, people are going to, just immediately go, whatever, the specialist, whatever. It's a big deal in Chicago. It is in the winter because you're going to be dealing with wind. Soldier Field is known for kind of vacuuming the wind in that field, and it can be very tough to kick. Very tough to punt. Johnson's got a big leg. Elliott's got a big leg. That's where this could really make the difference. Cody Parkey's been extremely inconsistent. Pat O'Donnell's played there for several years, but he's kind of an average punter. It'll be interesting to see what this game kind of manifests from the specialist.
In terms of returners, they have Tarik Cohen doing punt returns, so they win that. Darren Sproles hasn't looked quite the same in terms of punt returns as he has in the past. He's been great as a running back. Kick return, Boston Scott's been a whole lot of nothing. They use a few guys. Anthony Miller's one of them, so they have the edge there. I think that final tally is basically even. Right. And so then you would look at coaching. They're pretty. I mean, Nagy, however you say it. I think it's Nagy. I mean, he's on the rise, and he might catch Peterson one day. But I think right now you have to give Doug Peterson the edge in terms of coaching.
Well, I think when you look at Peterson's ability to trust his players, his understanding of his players being that he's coached most of them for 3 years, I think his ability to switch things up based on his quarterback. I also think Jim Schwartz is a better defensive coordinator than Vic Fangio. So I think overall this is a minor win for the Eagles.
All right. So, what's your score? What do you got?
I got it 19-17. So what I think actually happens here is the first half, the Eagles come out firing. They score a touchdown. Then the Bears score a touchdown, and then the Eagles score a touchdown, but Cody Parkey misses a PAT. Bears come back, score another
Predicting
touchdown.
Predicting a PAT, I love that.
Yeah, scoring at the half is 14-13. The Eagles won the toss. So they deferred. They get the ball back.
Wow, we'll find out.
Yeah, they get the ball back. Nick Foles leads an opening drive, leads to a field goal. Then it becomes kind of an arms race of defensive prowess, and then you see homeboy Cody Parkey nail a field goal. So it's 17-16, heading into late in the fourth quarter. I think Elliott makes a field goal at the end. And
how long of a field goal? You're getting so specific.
I'm gonna go with a 47-yarder.
47. That's a pretty good distance. Not easy with the wind.
You listen to this podcast. You didn't realize you were going to get a story out of it.
Is he going to be kicking against the wind or into it?
I'm hoping he's kicking against it because
make it even more badass.
Make it because then it'll be known as the Elliott game because he's coming home.
He's had enough of those. Yeah,
they'll call it the homecoming game.
Maybe they won't. I don't know. Either way. And but yeah, I mean, I have it also being a close game. I have it as 24-21, Eagles winning. I think if the Eagles fall behind early, I think they're going to lose. I don't think this Bears defense is the type that is going to give up a lead if they get one. So that first drive, they need Nick Foles to come out and lead a scoring drive in the first drive, and they need that defense to hopefully stop them from scoring a touchdown. And I think we're going to find out pretty early how the game's going to go. It'll be close, but I have the Eagles going 24-21. I think that's a good point to end on. We're going to head out we're both flying out to Chicago this weekend. I'm excited to check out the Windy City. If you guys are out there, give us a holler. Thanks for listening. Subscribe, and we'll talk to you guys soon.